Greetings, Poke fans! Michael here, and Pokemon Legends Arceus, Arceus, has what I believe to be the most interesting Pokedex in Pokemon history. That's because it was written in the past by Professor Laventon, who is being exposed to and learning about these Pokemon genuinely for the first time, as opposed to modern day Pokedexes, where we've theoretically known a lot more about Pokemon for a lot longer. I wanted to dive deep into this new, old Pokedex, so I read through every single dex entry and compiled a list of those that I thought were the most worthy of note, due to being crazy, or disturbing, or funny, or new information about old Pokemon, or something else. Also, in case it's not obvious, this video will include spoilers for new Pokemon and new forms, so if you don't want to see those, then I'm not entirely sure why you clicked on the video. Hisui in Decidueye's dex entry says the air stored inside the rhechices of Decidueye's feathers insulates the Pokemon against Hisui's extreme cold. This is firm proof that evolution can be influenced by environment. This dex entry simply explains why Hisui in Decidueye exists. It adapted to the harsh cold of the Hisui/Sinnoh region. Hisui in Typhlosion's entry reads, said to purify lost, forsaken souls with its flames and guide them to the afterlife. I believe its form has been influenced by the energy of the sacred mountain towering at Hisui's center. So instead of adapting to the cold like Decidueye, Typhlosion adapted to the magic of the mountain? Oshawott entry says this Pokemon from the Unova region uses the shell on its belly as a weapon to cut down its foes. Thus, I've conferred upon this shell the name Scalchop. We've known forever that Oshawott's shell is called the Scalchop, but we didn't know that Professor Laventon was the one to name it that. Hisui in Samurot's entry says, Heart of Heart and Deft of Blade, this rare form of Samurott is a product of the Pokemon's evolution in the region of Hisui. Its turbulent blows crash into foes like ceaseless pounding waves. I thought this one was worthy of note because Decidueye and Typhlosion got explanations for why their forms exist, and Samurott did not. It just says this is what happens when it evolves in Hisui, so I don't really know why it was counted out here. Bidoof's entry says, Bidoof has an unsophisticated face and is rarely flustered by anything. There have been incidents involving Bidoof sauntering into villages and gnawing on the houses without a single care. This game is the first time Bidoof has been labeled as a pest, which is so rude, how dare they slander our lord? Babarrel's entry says, Babarrel's fur repels water and is also a fantastic material for heat retention. These Pokemon create dams on rivers to live in. We knew about the dams, but the first sentence sticks out to me. It repels water, which kind of makes sense, but the line about heat retention is interesting. Are they saying that because that's how Babarrel does well in the relatively cold climate of Hisui? Or are they saying that because people are making clothes out of it? Staravia's entry says they form remarkably large flocks and are constantly fighting amongst themselves. I suspect that those with magnificent plumes on their heads are the strong ones. We know about the flocks and the fighting amongst themselves, but the theory that the larger plumes is the stronger Staravia, I think is interesting, because when it becomes a Staraptor, its plume becomes a whole emo hair thing. So the longer it is, more likely to evolve, maybe. Luxio's entry says, proudly uses its electrified claws as weapons. It seems to be a gracious Pokemon, evenly sharing the spoils of the hunt with others of its kind. This is the first time we've learned that Luxio is a team player. Luxray's entry says they form packs, each having one male as leader. Legends say that when Luxray's two eyes shimmer with gold, the Pokemon can see through anything. The first part is interesting because this is the first time we've learned that Luxray don't just live in packs, but they live in packs with the same organizational patriarchal structure as lions. So that's really cool. But the second part is also interesting because it says legends say, which means that Professor Laventon doesn't know for certain that Luxray has X-ray vision, which we do know that in modern Pokemon games, but it also means that someone figured that out before Professor Laventon, and it somehow became a legend. Beautifly's entry says, a colorful and incredibly beautiful, but also greedy Pokemon. In an effort to keep its favorite food all to itself, it will chase away Combee as they try to gather nectar. We've known for a while that Beautifly is a jerk, but we didn't previously know that Beautifly would harass and steal from Combee specifically. Cascoon's entry says, the silk coating its body is thin but sufficiently strong. Cascoon silk has a luster and texture superior to that of Silcoon's, and clothes made using Cascoon silk are regarded as top-notch. This is the first mention of Cascoon having higher quality silk than Silcoon, which surprises me. Silcoon has silk in its name and is not the one who ends up becoming a poison type. It's also the first time we hear of Cascoon silk being used to make clothing, top-notch clothing at that. Just like my Pokemon Legends Arceus shirt. It's not made of Cascoon silk, but it feels so good it might as well have been. It's available at MandJTVmerch.com, but is going away very, very soon. Like days, if not mere hours. So if you want one, you have to get it now. The link's in the description below, MandJTVmerch.com. Drifblim's entry says, it drifts along at dusk, perfectly silent. Its transient, melancholy aspect touches some people deeply. Every so often, one will come upon a song or poem devoted to Drifblim. I think this is hilarious. I love how in previous generations Dex entries it talks about how Drifblim carries people off to the afterlife and how the gas inside its body is actually souls. But then here, it's like, aw, he looks so melancholy and quiet. I'm gonna write a song. Weasel's entry says it moves freely in the water by spinning its forked tail for propulsion. The resemblance to the screw of a steamboat is coincidental. Obviously, we know that Weasel's design was partially based on the screw of a boat. However, in universe, it's kind of interesting to see Professor Laventon go, oh yeah, these things are similar, but it's just a coincidence. Floatzel's entry says, has a long, rather splendid flotation sac, which prevents Floatzel from drowning even in stormy seas. One might glimpse this species around fishing hamlets from time to time. I'm including this entry solely for the fact that I think it's funny that Laventon calls its flotation sac rather splendid. The next entries are those for Burmy and Wormadam. All 6 of them. This is the first time that we've gotten unique Dex entries for every single one of their forms, and it provides some interesting insight into the differences between each of them. If its cloak is even slightly damaged, Burmy will immediately repair it with whatever is close at hand. The Pokemon within the cloak is scrawny and vulnerable to the cold. It creates a cloak by weaving together sand, mud, and silk it has spat out. This earthen cloak is ruined by wind and rain, so the Pokemon hides away in caves and other such places. When confronted by a lack of other materials, Burmy will create its cloak using dust and refuse. The cloak seems to be more comfortable than one would think. The cloak, fashioned from plant matter, has merged with the Pokemon and is now part of the body, like fur or skin. I suspect this fusion is an effect of the energy evolved in evolution. Its earthen skin is reasonably hard. It has no problem repelling a Starly's pecking, at least. Its body, composed of refuse, blends into the scenery so much as to be inconspicuous. This seems to be the perfect way for the Pokemon to evade the detection of predators. There's a lot of fun tidbits in there, like Burmy's sand cloak, not just being the result of being around sand and dirt, but also because it moves to caves to keep that cloak from getting destroyed. And how the trash cloak is more comfortable, and how Wormadam's trash cloak is the best camouflage, which is not what you'd expect, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because most predators aren't gonna be trying to eat trash, unless it's a raccoon. Golem's entry says the rock-like shell is shed each year. The cast-off shell then crumbles, reverting to a mass of soil, which can be spread across fields to promote crop growth. We've known for a while that Golem sheds its shell, but we didn't know that the shell became very fertile soil. So I guess it makes sense to keep a Golem around, so when it sheds its shell, you can make plants grow well. Oh, I kind of rhymed there, that was fun. Weird Ear's entry says, the black orbs shine with an uncanny light when the Pokemon is erecting invisible barriers. The fur shed from its beard retains heat well and is a highly useful material for winter clothing. Obviously, Weird Ear is a new Pokemon, so any information about it is going to be new. However, I'm not gonna cover every single new Pokemon's entry, only if it's something that I think stands out, like Weird Ear's beard hair being used to make very nice winter clothing. Munchlax's entry says its robust stomach allows it to nonchalantly devour even rotted matter. It pays frequent visits to villages, seeking out food scraps intended for compost. This is kind of like the Bidoof entry, another tidbit into the past about how Munchlax would wander into villages and eat out of their trash cans. So it's like a raccoon. Snorlax's entry says, this glutton appears in villages without warning and devours the entirety of their rice granaries. Such occurrences have long been counted among the gravest of disasters. That's horrifying. We've known for a while that Pokemon can harm people. That's kind of the central premise of this game. But even in previous generations, we knew that. Like, talk about how Gyarados can just burn a village to the ground, and how I feel like Gyarados was probably the Pokemon that destroyed Commander Comodo's village and killed a bunch of people before the events of Legends Arceus. But all of those are situations of Pokemon directly attacking people and structures. But this Snorlax situation is different. And it's also not how Snorlax has been portrayed in the past. Lots of its previous Dex entries just talk about how hungry it is, and how it sleeps a lot, and how it's docile. They literally talk about children playing on its belly. But this reveals that, at least in the past, Snorlax would starve entire villages of people by eating all of their food. I don't know about you, but I find it deeply unsettling that this Pokemon harmed people not just by attacking them, but by creating a famine. And yes, an argument could be made that maybe this is better because it's not directly killing people, and so they have time to recover and find other food sources. But the fact that the Dex entry says that this is counted among the gravest of disasters means that the people that this happened to probably didn't recover. And instead of just dying quickly to a hyper beam, they had a long, slow death by starvation. Oh my God.
Haha, it is I, Grunty Boy.
Hey man, oh, did you get new Raycon earbuds?
That I did. They're sponsoring this video and were kind enough to provide me with them.
Cool, but why blue? I feel like blue is kind of more my color, whereas yours are more red and black.
Oh, I just chose it to represent the tears of my enemies. But regardless of the color, I'm always sticking with Raycon earbuds. The everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever. And they have the perfect gel tips with multiple sizes, so you can always get the perfect fit. Look! Nothing!
I totally agree. I love using mine to listen to music while I'm exercising, since moving around a lot with wired headphones isn't really practical.
I know, right? It's like trying to go for a leisurely jog, but with a long, thin worm giving you way too much physical affection.
Preach. And they're so reasonably priced. Quality audio at half the price of other premium audio brands, and it's clear people love them due to their 48,000 five-star reviews. Not to mention their 8 hours of playtime with 32 hours using the charging case. Click the link in the description below or go to buyraycon.com/MandJTV to get 15% off your Raycon purchase.
You know, I gotta ask this, why is the link never /GruntyBoy?
You don't run the channel.
I'm a part of every sponsorship.
That's not enough.
What? Ugh, keep up your sass or you'll be added to the pool of people whose tears this color represents. Ta-ta!
Raichu's entry says it can discharge bursts of electricity exceeding 100,000 volts. A single strike with that amount of power would incapacitate one of the Caparaja of my homeland. Two things about this. The first is that this is taking the Fire Red Dex entry and replacing Indian Elephant with Caparaja, which I guess makes sense. It was weird that they talked about real animals in the first place. And secondly, this entry basically confirms that Professor Laventon is from Galar, because Galar is the only place we are currently aware of where you can find a Caparaja. Actually, my editor Katie just sent this to me right after I finished recording, and Caparaja's sword entry says they came over from another region long ago. So maybe Laventon isn't from Galar, and it's from wherever Caparaja is originally from. Chimchar's entry says, full of vigor and always in high spirits. It was once known by the name Lantern Tail and feared as some kind of apparition. I think it's funny how people in the past are so dumb. They thought this tiny little monkey was a ghost. Monferno's entry reads, the deeper the blue on its face, the more powerful it will grow to become. It leaps about every which way and lands powerful blows against its opponents with the flame on its tail. This is interesting to me because it seems to be in direct opposition to a previous Dex entry. Monferno's Heart Gold Soul Silver entry says that the brighter blue on its face, the higher rank in the pack it is. The deeper blue, the more powerful it will become. The brighter blue, the higher rank in the pack. So either it's contradictory, or the brighter blue are the more powerful as Monferno, but then end up less likely to evolve. And the deeper blue ones end up in Fernape and then are stronger than everything else and go out on their own. I don't know. Baneri's entry says, my hypothesis as to why Baneri rolls up its ears is that its hearing is far too keen. I surmise that the Pokemon protects its hearing by limiting the sound that may enter its ears. This is interesting because it's just a hypothesis. Professor Laventon is theorizing why Baneri rolls up its ears. And either this is a new observation other Dex entries never made, or he's just wrong. Other Dex entries talk about how it keeps its ears rolled up when it's scared, as basically a defense mechanism. Because when it unrolls its ears, it's powerful enough to shatter boulders. Okay, so I wanted to bring up this entry because according to the knowledge that we supposedly have in modern days, Professor Laventon is wrong. Baneri doesn't keep its ears rolled up to limit its hearing, it keeps them rolled up so that if it gets attacked, it can fight back. Cherubi's entry says, once the fruit growing alongside the main body is large and plump, Cherubi will use the nutrients within to evolve. The fruit then detaches, becoming nourishment for other creatures. A lot of Cherubi's previous entries talk about how the small fruit stores the energy needed for evolution, but none of them talk about the fruit falling off and then being eaten by other Pokemon. Psyduck's entry says, suffers perpetual headaches. If the agony grows too great, Psyduck's latent power erupts, contrary to Psyduck's intent. Ergo, I am exploring ways to ease the pain. I just think this is cute. Professor Laventon learns about Psyduck's headaches and then immediately is like, I want to figure out a way to help them. Vespiquen's entry says, commands its subjects to build its hive. It will dispatch any interlopers who dare sneak into its nest and use them as nourishment for itself. Ooh, this is the first time we hear about Vespiquen eating Pokemon that invade its hive, which is like not that surprising, but this is the first time we've heard about it. Cleavor's entry says, a violent creature that fells towering trees with its crude axes and shields itself with hard stone. If one should chance upon this Pokemon in the wilds, one's only recourse is to flee. I just thought this was fun and ominous. And also incorrect. I dealt with a Cleavor by throwing bags of dust at it. Apom's entry says, this treetop dweller possesses a tail as dexterous as a hand. Ancient writings describe this Pokemon as a one-armed oddity. This is interesting because while other Dex entries have talked about how its tail is more useful than its arms, how its arms get clumsy because it rarely uses them, it's the first time we hear about ancient people, not like 200 years ago Jubilife Village people, ancient people actually thinking Apom only had one arm. Ambipom's entry says, to affirm their kinship, members of this species will form a ring by linking their newly doubled tails together. On rare occasions, humans have been accepted into such rings. We've known about Ambipom's hand-holding friendship circles for a while, but we didn't know that people could be in them, which doesn't that sound nice? Just holding hands with Pokemon singing Kumbaya? Gastrodon's West Sea form entry says, it eats beach sand for nourishment. Should one Gastrodon encounter another of a different color, a fierce battle will inevitably ensue. First off, we didn't know Gastrodon had some prejudices, but also this entry directly conflicts with another entry. It says that Gastrodon eat beach sand, but then its moon entry says that it eats plankton. So like, which one is it? Is it both? Does it differ on the region? I don't know. Overquill's entry says, its lance-like spikes and savage temperament have earned it the nickname Sea Fiend. It slurps up poison to nourish itself. I wanted to talk about this one to first acknowledge that Overquill is one of my favorite Pokemon names they've ever come up with, but also because I don't understand the logistics. Like, it creates poison, but then also eats poison. So can it eat the poison that it creates? Or is this like a Natsu situation where he can't eat his own fire? I don't know. Happini's entry says, in imitation of Chansey, it keeps a round stone tucked into its belly pouch and cherishes it dearly. It gets along with children and will sometimes play house with them for fun. I just thought that was cute. Roselia's entry says, though beautiful, it has highly poisonous thorns. There's an old tradition in my homeland wherein one would send these thorns to an opponent to challenge them to a duel. First off, we should acknowledge that dueling is one of the stupidest things mankind has come up with. Like, oh, we had an argument, let's shoot each other. And apparently they did it in Galar and challenged each other by mailing Roselia thorns to each other, which is so odd, but kind of badass. Hisuian Lilligant's Dex entry says, I suspect that its well-developed legs are the result of a life spent on mountains covered in deep snow. The scent it exudes from its flower crown heartens those in proximity. Well, he does say suspect, so we don't know 100% for certain. This is Hisuian Lilligant's only Dex entry, so we're gonna go with it. I thought it was interesting that this Lilligant would choose to live in snowy mountains. Like, it's a grass fighting type. It has no ice aspect to it, like Abomasnow does. So the fact that it lives in snow, despite being weak to ice, is kind of like, wow, this thing's hardcore. Gardevoir's entry says, it will dedicate itself to defending a master it has come to adore. Its pure white dress, reminiscent of those worn by ladies of nobility, is the dress of one who is willing to risk their life. Couple things, we've known that Gardevoir's a Pokemon that'll risk its life for its master, but I just think the wording of this, the dress it wears is a dress of one willing to risk its life, is kind of over the top and kind of funny. But also the fact that it calls it a dress is interesting. It doesn't just call it a part of its body. So that's a bit unusual. And also apparently the ladies of nobility, either in Galar, Laventon's homeland, or if there are any ladies of nobility in the Hisui region, I haven't seen any. Well, regardless of where they are, they wear white dresses. Like they're all getting married at once. Yanma's entry says, its frail wings are so thin that one can see clear through them. However, during flight, these wings exhibit the power to churn air with a force enough to launch a house skyward. Holy crap, Yanma. Other Dex entries talked about how it could shatter glass, but lift a house? Are the Hisuian Yanma just extra shredded? Pachirisu's entry says, a species related to the Pikachu line. Though Pachirisu is a calm Pokemon, it still presents a danger should one touch its electrified tail or cheeks. This is the first instance of a Dex entry directly acknowledging that a Pikachu clone is a Pikachu clone. Stunky's entry says, the poison that gushes from its aft end is accompanied by an utterly evil-smelling odor with such potency that one whiff can induce memory loss. Other Stunky entries have talked about how it has other effects like causing you to faint, but causing you to just have memory loss is like, that might be even scarier. Skunktank's entry says, sprays a poisonous fluid to take down prey. Sometimes, unable to stomach the stench of its own fluid, it leaves the bested prey uneaten. This is amazing. Skunktank smells so bad that it itself will sometimes be like, oh, might have overdone it a bit. I'm not hungry anymore. Teddy Ursa's entry says it licks its paws because of the sweet honey that has soaked into them. It is cunning, stealing into the nests of comb bee and taking for itself the honey that the comb bee have amassed. We've known for a while that Teddy Ursa is obsessed with honey, but this is the first time it explicitly mentions that it goes after comb bee's honey. However, that also means, because of Vespiquen's Dex entry, that probably more than once, a Vespiquen has eaten a Teddy Ursa. Ursaluna's entry says, I believe it was Hisui's swampy terrain that gave Ursaluna its burly physique and newfound capacity to manipulate peat at will. Another explanation of a Hisuian form/evolution. It's just the much swampier terrain compared to other regions. Sliggoo's entry says, a creature given to melancholy. I suspect its metallic shell developed as a result of the mucus on its skin reacting with the iron in Hisui's water. Two things. One, it developed a shell because there's more iron in the water, so that's interesting. And two, it's always sad. Just given to melancholy, which kind of makes me a little sad. Hisuian Gudra's entry says, able to freely control the hardness of its metallic shell. It loathes solitude and is extremely clingy. It will fume and run riot if those dearest to it ever leave its side. I think it's cool that it can control the hardness of its shell. That's really interesting. And also, this reveals that Gudra is still a Gudra. Rhyhorn's entry says, ludicrously strong. When it butts head with a mountain, it is the mountain that shatters. but its short legs struggle with turns, and it is incapable of stopping unless it collides with something. Apparently the Rhyhorn and Hisui are on some kind of steroids because the other Dex entries talk about how it can shatter skyscrapers, not mountains. Sudowoodo's entry says, though it pretends to be a tree, it fails to fool even children. To the touch, its body feels more like a rock than tree bark. Sudowoodo's extreme aversion to water merits special note. The later parts of that, we've known that. But the first part is so funny. Sudowoodo's so bad at its job that children can tell it's not a tree. Togetic's entry says, no records exist of Togetic being seen in the wilds. Rumors abound that it evolves under the loving care of a trusted human companion, upon whom the Pokemon then bestows great joy. This one is nonsense. There's literally a Togetic in the wild in Legends Arceus. I caught it. I used it on my team. The next entries are those for Porygon, Porygon 2, and Porygon Z. These Pokemon are ones created in modern times, and the only way they're obtainable in the Hisui region, 200 or so years in the past, is through space-time rifts, where they have shown up there, yoinked through space and time. So the Dex entries Professor Laventon writes for them, because he can't find them anywhere else, and they involve technology that doesn't exist, are really fascinating. It has no discernible heartbeat and does not seem to draw breath, and yet it appears to function without issue. I cannot even begin to explain this utterly bizarre anomaly. A bizarre item caused this Pokemon to evolve. While it now exhibits many new gestures and expressions, its biology remains inscrutable. A curious item induced this evolution. The Pokemon's offensive capabilities have greatly increased, but the strangeness of its behavior has magnified in equal measure. This worries me. So Professor Laventon clearly has no idea how this modern technology Pokemon works, which makes perfect sense. He's also freaked out by Porygon Z, which I kinda get. Murkrow's entry says, widely shunned as a bearer of ill fortune. Upon crossing paths with this creature, I've been told one must chant, Workrum, Workrum, bad luck, don't come, as a protective incantation. I have Googled the word Workrum and can't find anything. So, is it just nonsense? They're telling people 100 years ago to just chant nonsense when you see a Murkrow? I don't know, it's very weird. Also, before we move on to the next Dex entry, don't forget to subscribe. Pretty please, that'd be great. Just go do it. We'll have a great time, I promise. Unknown's entry says, it is hard to believe these strangely shaped Pokemon are truly living creatures. I've pointed out that the species' many forms resemble writing from other lands. No one will take me seriously. This one, I'm just kind of offended on Professor Laventon's behalf. Unknown, like the unknown writing is just pictures of unknown. Why would they take him seriously? Celio's entry says its white whiskers are very sensitive. Celio will balance Spheal on the tip of its nose, checking its scent and its feel to be sure the Spheal is healthy. Apparently the Celio in the Hisui region are more caring than in other regions. That's because its Sapphire entry says Celio often balances and rolls things on the tip of its nose. While the Pokemon is rolling something, it checks the object's aroma and texture to determine whether it likes the object or not. Other entries talk about Celio balancing Spheal on its nose, but not about how it's checking to make sure the Spheal is healthy, and I just think that's sweet. Remoraid's entry says, spits water from its mouth with incredible accuracy. It captures Burmy by shooting them down off the branches from which they dangle. This is the first we've learned about Remoraid hunting Burmy. All its other entries mention flying prey, and looks like Burmy would probably be a lot easier to hit. Octillery's entry says, while Octillery still shoots water from its mouth, the drastic anatomical difference between it and Remoraid meant that for a long time, no one believed the former evolved from the latter. The Pokedex is officially acknowledging the crazy difference between Remoraid and Octillery, and how they evolve into each other makes very little sense, and I love that they acknowledge that. Perugly's entry says, though impudent and difficult to tame, Perugly enjoys great popularity due to its fur, the beauty of which surpasses even Velveteen. Perugly has nice fur, which we did not know before this. Chatot entry says, a versatile performer skilled in the imitation of human speech. It is said that older, more experienced Chatot can even understand the meaning of the words they mimic. This is the first time it's been acknowledged that Chatot can learn the meaning of the words, so Chatot can be kind of smart. Dusknoir's Dex entry says, comes to those whose lives have come to an end and escorts their souls to the afterlife, known to mistakenly take the souls of those who yet have life left in them, albeit rarely. Dusknoir accidentally steals souls of people who aren't dead. Considering Dusknoir's history of putting prey in its belly, eating the soul, and then spitting out the soulless body, I'm not that surprised. Hisuian Basculin's entry says, though it differs from other Basculin in several respects, including demeanor, this one is gentle, I've categorized it as a regional form given the vast array of shared qualities. I think this is fascinating. Basculin in other regions are very violent and very aggressive, but Hisuian Basculin is gentle and in fact, very timid. It is so quick to run away, and it is so hard to hit Pokemon in the water. Do you know how long it took me to catch a Basculin? Basculegion's entry says, clads itself in the souls of comrades that perished before fulfilling their goals of journeying upstream. No other species throughout all Hisui's rivers is Basculegion's equal. We knew this about Basculegion before the game came out, because they just told us this, but it is still just insane that Basculegion's whole thing is that it's a collection of a bunch of dead Basculin. Finneon's entry says, what a gorgeous sight this Pokemon is as it swims with its long, pink-painted caudal fins fluttering behind it. Finneon's beautiful appearance has led to its nickname, Finery Fish. A lot of its other entries say that its nickname is the Beautifly of the Sea. So this Finery Fish nickname is apparently what they called it in the older times. Gliscor's entry says it glides soundlessly on pitch black wings and sinks sharp fangs into the throat of its prey. It takes on a look of satisfaction once it has entirely drained its prey of blood. Gliscor, I love you, man, but holy crap. None of its previous Dex entries talk about it draining blood, much less draining all of the blood and then being satisfied about it. And that is quite disturbing. I still really like it though. Very cool. Next, I wanted to talk about the Dex entries for Rotom's various appliance forms. The fact that you can get these in the Hisui region is kind of a gag, frankly, because somehow you can get the appliances from Ginter despite no one knowing what they are except the player. And the Dex entries reflect that. The oven is called a strange cauldron. The washing machine is called an odd bureau. The fridge is called a bizarre cupboard. The fan is called a mysterious contraption. And the lawnmower is called a misshapen wheelbarrow. This is what I was talking about why this Pokedex is interesting. Because we know about this technology, but the writers of the Dex don't. And I just think that's fun. Miss Magus' Dex entry says, the incantations Miss Magus chants can ward against misfortune, so a custom exists of inviting it into one's home. Incur the Pokemon's displeasure, however, and disaster will surely ensue. Previous entries talk about how Miss Magus' incantations can either curse people or occasionally do nice things, but this is the first time we've known about a custom of inviting it into your house. Seems like quite the risk, in my opinion. Clefable's entry says, legend says that on clear, quiet nights, it listens for the voices of its kin living on the moon. I too often think of my homeland so far away. I wanted to mention this not because of anything about Clefable, just because I think it's sweet that Professor Laventon is writing in homesickness into the Pokedex. Johtoan Sneasel's Dex entry says, this Pokemon shares roots with the Sneasel of Hisui, but unlike that species, this one is spiteful in personality. I hypothesize that water and earth can affect Sneasel's mind and body. This entry actually gives us more information about Hisui and Sneasel, that it's not spiteful. It's a poison type, but it's not a jerk, apparently. Also, the mentioning of I hypothesize that water and earth can affect Sneasel's mind and body is kind of I expect that environment can cause regional variance, which is like, why did you even say that, dude? You've said that elsewhere in the Pokedex. Frostlass's entry says, a Pokemon inhabited by the soul of a woman who died bearing a grudge in the snowy mountains. Legends of Frostlass placing deathly curses on misbehaving men sends shivers down my spine. The legend about Frostlass being a reincarnated woman who died in the mountains, that's been around. But not the part about it placing curses on misbehaving men. Boys, men, treat women with respect because you just should, but also because a Frostlass could curse you. Hisui and Zorua's dex entry says, a once departed soul returned to life in Hisui, derives power from resentment, which rises as energy atop its head and takes on the forms of foes. In this way, Zorua vents lingering malice. Like with Basculegion, we knew about this before release, but it's still very disturbing. Hisui and Zoroark's entry says, with its disheveled white fur, it looks like an embodiment of death. Heedless of its own safety, Zoroark attacks its nemesis with a bitter energy so intense, it lacerates Zoroark's own body. Oh my God, we knew that Hisui and Zorua and Zoroark, super dark Pokemon, like vengeful, malice, treated poorly, died, came back to life, but like Zoroark attacking and lacerating its own body and not caring because it's so anger-filled is really dark. And it's not even a dark type anymore. Hisui and Braviary's entry says, screaming a blood-curdling battle cry, this huge and ferocious Pokemon goes out on the hunt. It blasts lakes with shockwaves, then scoops up any prey that float to the water's surface. I just thought that was a really interesting hunting method. You know, just psychic bombing a lake. Lucario's entry says, a most gallant-looking creature. It emits energy waves and controls them with precision, using them to sense even faraway beings. I have given the name Aura to this power. Like with Laventon naming Oshawott shell the Scalchop, Laventon was the person to name Lucario's power, Aura. Next is the Lake Trio, and I'll read all of their dex entries in one go, because apparently, despite them being very cute and the source of humanity having a lot of important things about their minds, people were afraid of them. Uxie, a Pokemon feared but also respected for stealing away the memories of evildoers. I have found records that suggest Uxie holds dominion over knowledge. Mesprit, known as the being of emotion. In legend, this Pokemon was feared, as any who showed disrespect would have their emotions thrown into disarray. Azelf, the dreaded being of willpower. Legends tell of this Pokemon manipulating the will of its adversaries and turning them into puppets of its own. So, stealing memories, causing emotional disarray, and turning people into puppets. I do kind of get why they were afraid of them now, yeah. Heatran's entry says, stories tell of this Pokemon being birthed from the boiling magma within Mount Coronet. Its molten steel body holds many mysteries. Mount Coronet? What happened to Stark Mountain? I thought Firespit Island was also supposed to be Stark Mountain. What? Why are they talking about within the magma of Mount Coronet? When has Mount Coronet ever had magma? Cresselia's entry says, Cresselia is reminiscent of the crescent moon. It leaves a brilliant line of light in its wake as it flies across the night sky. I dare say it resembles the heavenly maiden who created the Milky Way. I could not figure out who this heavenly maiden is. So apparently it's some kind of spirit, religious thing among Laventon's people, and apparently Cresselia looks like her. Next, we'll be looking at both of Tornadus' dex entries. Its incarnate entry says, the storm-stirring Pokemon is said to cause the seasons to turn by whipping up the air. I suspect its human-like form to be a false one. Then its Therian entry says, an example of what is known as a form change, though I suspect this strange avian guise to be Tornadus' true form. Tornadus has been sighted crossing the ocean while in this form. While it's only Laventon's suspicions, and we've seen he can be wrong, I do think it's interesting that he has this perspective that the Therian forms are the true forms, whereas the incarnate forms are fake forms. Which is interesting because the incarnate ones were the first ones introduced. It'll be interesting to see if we ever get confirmation about whether he's right. Enamorus's Therian form entry says, a different guise from its feminine humanoid form. From the clouds, it descends upon those who treat any form of life with disrespect and metes out wrathful, ruthless punishment. Damn, cloud turtle, snake on its back lady thing. Pretty hardcore. Next, I want to read the entries for the origin forms for both Dialga and Palkia, them getting origin forms alongside Giratina. Dialga says, radiant light caused Dialga to take on a form bearing a striking resemblance to the creator Pokemon. Dialga now wields such colossal strength that one must conclude this is its true form. Then Palkia says it soars across the sky in a form that greatly resembles the creator of all things. Perhaps this imitation of appearance is Palkia's strategy for gaining Arceus' powers. Progressing through the plot of the game doesn't really explain how or why the origin forms of Dialga and Palkia happen, but these dex entries kind of do. It's the original forms of Dialga and Palkia that they had because they were more similar to Arceus, the one that created them. Then finally, Shaman Sky's entry says, upon taking in the scent of a particular rare flower, Shaman is enveloped in light and its tiny body transforms. I took a whiff of the flower myself, but alas, my body remained unchanged. I'm mentioning this because it's funny. And that's all the dex entries I wanted to talk about. Be sure to pick up a Legends Arceus shirt at MandJTVmerch.com while you still have time, and thank you so much for watching. With an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon, who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link is in the description below. Also, if you want to check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend these videos here. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, big fans, gotta catch them all.